It was built by him according to a plan of his own, of which he was so proud that he was never done talking of it. It seemed a very good plan, too, and neat. He got a number of 10 by 12 tents and put them side by side. Over each tent he nailed boards, so that it turned into a sort of box. Over the outside of the boards he stacked up thick walls of sod. The result was a house with a number of rooms, and enough weight of walls to make it seem secure against the cold. But the sods had been put on when they were frozen. They never had a good chance to thaw and compact, and the result was that the Arctic cold was able to work its skinny fingers through and get at every living thing in the Tucker house. Tucker himself would not admit that he felt the cold. He was so proud of the new scheme of building he had invented, and he was so delighted with himself for having had such a grand idea, that I've actually seen him going around in his shirt sleeves, with only a light sweater through these rooms. The couple inches of fat which he wore under his hide could not insulate him against the cold of the far north. His skin used to turn blue and his eyes bulged, but he insisted that his was the warmest house in Nome. By the time I had dressed this morning, my spirits were at zero. My fingers were numb. My stomach was as empty as that of any soaring vulture. As I started for the door, I heard one of the men say, "That kid is broke and about starved." This made me walk more slowly, and my mouth fairly watered with hope. But the man's partner said to him, "Don't be a fool. The kid's a bum, and we ain't any too flush." "Yeah, you said it right," said the first man, and I walked on into the hallway. I went by a doorway inside which a pair of men were cursing each other in voices that reached up the scale and told that blows were coming, but I had seen so much fighting in Nome that I was not interested enough to stop and inquire about it, or wait to hear the scrap begin. Fistfights were a drug on the market in the Nome streets, where 5,000 wastrels and unemployed tumbled and fought like seagulls for the scraps that fell from the fat tables of the land. A few steps farther, I heard a woman crying, on a deep moaning note, and through the flimsy door distinctly I could hear the sound of blows against flesh. Either some brute of a man was beating her, or else she was striking her own breast. Now, weakened as I was, and in that horrible atmosphere, it made me a little sick. I stopped and leaned against the wall with my head spinning. A couple of men pressed by me, heard the sounds inside the room, and went by, grinning to one another. This beastliness in human nature then took me by the throat and gave me a shake, as it were. My circulation picked up, and I got so strong that I tapped on that door and then pushed it open. If there were a man inside, I would be beaten to a pulp, but I had a curious starved desire to tell him what I thought of his brutality. There was no man inside. There was only a red-headed girl sitting on the side of her bunk and swaying backward and forward, with her head thrown back and her hands whacking against her chest now and then. From a husky deep pitch of her voice, I had taken her to be a woman of middle age, but she was only a girl of 20 or 19. This made a tremendous difference. The horror went a pair of octaves up the scale. I closed the door behind me, and the squeak of the hinges this time made her start up. She asked me what I wanted while I stared at her for a moment through the wretched gloom of that half-light. This red-headed girl was not a beauty, but she was good-looking. Even through that twilight I was struck by the deep blue of her eyes. She had a bit too much mouth and not quite enough chin, but she was decidedly what one would call a pretty girl. I told her that I wanted nothing except to stop her crying if I could. "You're going to stop it, are you?" asked the girl in a dry way, but with a sob or two bubbling up. "I will if I'm able to be any good for you," I told her. She came up to me and took me by the shoulders. She was just my height, and backed me around until what light there was came bang into my face. "You're going to help me," she said. The sneer in her voice did not bother me. I had had too many of the same sort of sneers thrown my way since I came north, and now I took them for granted. "I'll do what I can," I said. "I know that I'm no Calmont or Massey." Calmont, do you see, was the strongest man in Nome, people said.